high summer seems a very good time to be discussing questions of high arts, aesthetics, beauty, and all of that. And I've always thought we're very lucky to have you with us in the Erasmus Forum, Semir. But I'd like us to start by questioning interdisciplinarity. Last podcast that we recorded, we were discussing diversity and inclusion, and those sacred cows appear very often in the modern university as well, without it seems to me many people knowing what it is they're talking about. But interdisciplinarity, we can all agree that it's a good thing, but it's not a thing that's much practiced in the modern university, is it?
It is not practiced in the modern university, but it used to be practiced before. And in fact, emphasizing interdisciplinarity as they have for the past decade heavily is in a sense an acknowledgement of the fact that they are failing in the mission. Now, what is the mission of a university? The mission of a university is the acquisition of knowledge, creativity, opening new venues, and you cannot do that by sticking to a single discipline. I wonder where this catchword came from. It's very, very difficult to understand, but all research councils and all universities now emphasize two things which they do not practice. One is interdisciplinarity. So interdisciplinarity to them means biochemistry and chemistry, or physiology and pharmacology. But think of physiology and philosophy, it would drive them mad. And the whole idea of why this came about is very, very, very puzzling. Now, I looked at the European Research Council's grants. Oh, by the way, interdisciplinarity is one thing they emphasize, and the other thing they emphasize is something which is risky. And in fact, they're extremely risk aversive.
Highly.
Extremely risk aversive. So I looked at the program of the European Research Council some 5 years ago, to be sure, but because they are one of these organizations that have a lot of money to spend around, and they always emphasize interdisciplinarity. And I looked at about 650 grants they had given in 1 year, and not a single one of them, not a single one, was really interdisciplinary in the sense that you would understand. Now let me give you an example of what is really interdisciplinarity, which today would not pass through any of these research councils. So Werner Heisenberg, who is a very well-known, very important physicist, one of the
Heisenberg principle.
The Heisenberg principle, one of the founders of quantum mechanics. He was after the smallest particle, like so many physicists are. But he said something. His father, was a Greek teacher, and he used to read Plato on vacation. Werner Heisenberg. So when he came to consider the smallest particle, he wrote amazing insight. He said, the smallest particle in this world is not something that you can see in the traditional sense. It's a concept. It's something that you have to reach by abstraction, by a thought process, which is really derived from Plato's theory of forms. Now, just go and put pen on paper and apply to one of the UK research councils,
yes,
or
and
the ERC,
see how far that will get you.
See how far it will get you. And I can tell you, I speak from experience, because I have been told on numerous occasions, well, not numerous, but on several occasions, that look, this is too philosophical, this is too much in the arts. But much of my work in neurobiology of beauty is derived from a single question asked by somebody who's never heard about the brain, namely Clive Bell.
Yes.
He asked a very simple question. He said, what is
beauty?
That all... No.
What is art?
More than that. No. What do all things which are experienced as beautiful have in common? If you can tell me that, he said, you have solved the problem of aesthetics. Now, I thought to myself, well, that's a very good question. And we can apply that. That's a question we can apply in neurobiology and ask the following question. Slight change. What neural mechanisms are commonly active when you experience beauty derived from different sources? If you can answer that question, you have answered the question of aesthetics in a neurobiological context. But you see, fortunately, I had grants to pursue that. But if you apply to the ERC, I have never succeeded, by the way. I have applied to the ERC with the strong emphasis on disciplinarity, and they cannot do it. And one of the reasons, actually, for that is the infrastructure. They don't have mixed committees. They've got a scientific committee,
yes,
and they've got a non-scientific, humanistic committee, and the two don't mix together.
No.
They can't pass judgment on applications. And so, my final word on this is the interdisciplinarity program, as they have said, is a fraud and a sham.
I think quite often what we stumble in here is a recognition of the way in which it's the label that matters in the modern academic community. And as long as you can stick a label on something, put a tick against it, and then, hey presto, you're in business. For example, the joint honours degree, yoking together two wildly different subjects, regarded as somehow interdisciplinarity. I'll give you an example. Just a very distinguished senior lecturer in the French department at a university I know really quite well, once discovered that one of his students was actually studying a joint honours degree in marine biology and French literature.
Mm-hmm.
Reeled back in astonishment and said, he's a sardonic chap. He said, why on earth are you doing this joint honours degree? Do you want to teach French to dolphins? Genuine interdisciplinarity is more than just yoking together two different subjects. Isn't it? If you know your onions, as it were, in any one subject really well, and go down to the taproot, you want to establish connections between your own taproot and other disciplines down there, as it were.
Yes, and actually the precise area is not that important. That you can get insights.
Yes.
You can get insights from reading different things. Now, I don't think I would have ever landed the question which has been very, very seminal for me in my research had I not actually read Clive Bell's book on art. Now, for me, as a neurobiologist, to read Clive Bell's book, written in 1914, not many people have heard about it. It may seem very obscure, but the insight, and there was a big insight there. And in the same way, you can get lots of insights from literary works. And so when you plug interdisciplinarity, you should not lay borders.
Yeah.
You can be philosophy or religion or anything you want.
It seems to me it should emerge naturally from what you do.
Absolutely.
There's not much use coming, as it were, to a crossroads and saying interdisciplinarity this direction, single disciplinarity there. It emerges naturally from the process of the doing of it.
Yes.
So you start life, in your case, academically, neurobiology, and then you're led to this subject of neuroaesthetics, which is the study of how an awareness of beauty causes a bit of a tingle of the nerve ends, if I can speak with all the due authority of a layman in these matters. Is that more or less the area we're discussing?
Yes, we're taking Clive Bell's question and asking what are the neural mechanisms that are engaged during the experience of beauty derived from different sources. Musical beauty, visual beauty, moral beauty, beauty from sadness, beauty from joy, and so on. And literary beauty, which has not been studied as extensively for a number of reasons. But that's, in a nutshell, what we're doing, yes.
Now, visual beauty, let's start this. And we're talking about human beings now.
Yes.
No evidence that animals are sensitive to beauty.
There is. I mean, they do. There's indirect evidence. Of course, you don't know whether they're feeling beauty, but pufferfish, David Attenborough has a wonderful film about it. Very elaborate circles which are used for reproduction. But they are very beautiful. They're the same pattern all the time, and they last very briefly until the tide comes and basically demolishes them. So,
might one conceive of a world in which some kinds of dolphins, as it were, are really keen on Mozart symphonies
yes. Well,
and
yes,
respond? How would we measure their response, I wonder? What would count as a response?
Well, in the case of humans, the response is relatively easy to measure. So, if I describe it very briefly, so when cells in an area of the brain are especially active, the amount of blood diverted to that area increases because their metabolic requirement increases. And there is a difference in the oxygenated blood, which is diverted to the area, and deoxygenated blood, which is removed from the area, because they have different magnetic properties. And these differences can be detected by cameras around the head, in the case of magnetic resonance imaging instruments, and localized, and their intensity can also be determined. So I can tell you, for example, that you appreciate a painting by, let's say, Leonardo more than you appreciate a painting by Damien Hirst, for example. Because I can see the more intense activity in your brain. And that's it. So you
But
take that.
but neuroaesthetics of itself is not going to be able to tell us what the categories of different kinds of visual art might be.
No,
It might just jumble. I mean, one criticism might be it just jumbles together all possible aesthetic impulses and doesn't actually tell us what's good art and what's bad art.
Well, it does, in a sense, tell you what is good art for an individual. Because the area which is commonly active with any type of aesthetic experience is located in the medial orbital frontal cortex, which is part of the frontal brain. Now, that area is active whether you experience musical beauty or visual beauty or mathematical beauty. Mathematical beauty is very important. But if you do not find that beautiful, it's not active.
Yes.
So it does say this about an individual. But now let's take a question of subjectivity and objectivity. The easiest way to kill a conversation at dinner when somebody talks about beauty is to say, oh, well, that's all subjective. But actually, a lot of beauty is not subjective. I mean, a very, very beautiful face from, say, Japan or Botswana or wherever, will be, I'm talking very beautiful faces, will be considered to be very beautiful in Europe too, and vice versa. So if you take an external observer who records the responses of, say, 100,000 people to a Japanese or a Botswanan or a Mexican face, and finds that 80% of the people rate it as very beautiful, then it's an objective fact. He will say, look, and now with buildings, slightly different. I think it's unlikely to get the same kind of consensus.
Formality, the formal properties of the work of art. Let's look at the human face, for example. Rather interesting in the case of Modigliani, who seems to merge together certain Oriental ideas that those oval faces of his and the Western notion of the classically beautiful face. Now, some would say that you have to have that kind of formality in the beauty, formal properties, 2 eyes, nose here, chin there. That if you stray too far away from that, it's going to be very difficult for people to recognize beauty. True or not, do you think?
Well, the prime example of that is Francis Bacon.
Yes.
You see, Francis Bacon declared this, I'm quoting him, he said, I want to give a visual shock. I don't know what a visual shock is. It's not something you get from the store, it's just a visual shock. And what did he do? He mutilated faces and bodies, and he got away with it. He never mutilated objects, because for faces and bodies, we have got a sort of a template in our brains. We are born with that template. You're absolutely right. You've got to have the 2 eyes and the nose and the mouth in the correct proportion, correct places. If they are deformed, if they're not in the right places, then the face is very unlikely to be considered to be very beautiful. So, so you must have these properties of correct two eyes, nose, in the correct proportion, correct relationships. But there is another ineffable quality.
Style.
Style.
The way in which one represents these two things. I mean, if one is saying that beauty consists of two eyes there, not there, one isn't necessarily saying anything very interesting or distinctive. It's the way in which these properties of the face are rendered.
But that is not easily measurable. Nobody has succeeded in measuring it. But I tell you where you can measure it, how you can measure it. You can measure it by finding activity in the brain. So you see, if you get somebody who's got all the correct relationships and everything right, but is not very beautiful, in fact is very neutral, you're not going to get activity in the medial orbital frontal cortex. But if you have somebody with all these right proportions and is considered to be very beautiful by one person, you're going to get activity there. So that person has experienced beauty, even though you cannot describe what extra quality has made it beautiful.
Now here's a difficult question that arises, and we've talked about this before. A child who is physically handicapped, a face that is deformed by all conventional descriptions. But the parents, I be bound, in their cortexes, are going to be registering sensations of love, if that is different from beauty. We might get onto that later. But they are surely not wrong to find beauty in their child in those circumstances.
Yes, but the beauty they find is a different kind of beauty. They do love their child. I mean, lots of parents who have children with Down syndrome become very attached to them and love them more than, in fact, their normal children. De Gaulle is a primary example. He said, I've learned so much from my daughter. It's a different kind of, it's not beauty. It is certainly a profound love. But it's not, I don't think it's the experience of beauty. I mean, I don't know anybody who's addressed the question of whether they find it beautiful, but they find the relationship beautiful.
Let's discuss moral beauty.
Yes.
It's kind of a tough area, I think, this, because people evaluate morality, of course, in widely different ways.
Yeah.
The same action that may seem highly moral to some people would appear less than altruistic, possibly very selfish to others. But there is such a thing as moral beauty.
Yes.
And people recognize it and say, that's what you did there was not just admirable or brave, it was beautiful what you did. Now, is this a completely different area of evaluation, do you think, of beauty?
No.
What's going on?
The ancient Greeks had a single word, kalon, to denote both physical and moral beauty.
Yes.
And the prime example of that is the Westmacott Youth, which is at the British Museum, of a very beautiful athlete whose downturned head, after success at some athletic game, signifies modesty and humility.
The downturned head, of course, one of the late Princess Diana's kind of killer movements.
Yes.
Shy dies.
Yes, shy. That's right. Yes. Now, it is a fact that in courts of law, you're much more likely to get a lenient sentence or none at all if you're very beautiful or very handsome. This is a well-documented fact. And
let's see whether that works out with any of the rioters who are appearing before their betters this summer.
Well, it'll be very interesting to document, yes, very. But it also is true that people who are very beautiful or handsome have got a much better chance of getting a job because we impute qualities to them which they may not necessarily have. Now,
but there may be complete stinkers. I mean,
often
they may
look
wonderful.
Often they are. But why is it that you link these two? And I tell you why. The answer is that both moral qualities and aesthetic qualities result in activity in the same part of the brain. And I think, in a sense, by taking on somebody who's very beautiful, very handsome, you are really, in a sense, thinking that you're pursuing the pleasure principle. And the pleasure principle, I mean, something that gives you pleasure also activates the same part of the brain. So you see, Freud's idea of the pleasure principle, which was actually Jeremy Bentham's idea before him, it has got sound biological foundations.
Yes, well, there's nothing wrong about seeking pleasure.
No.
It's the kind of pleasure that is really very important. I mean, there's an English philosopher who once said, "There's nothing wrong with cool self-love." This, I think, was Bishop Butler, great moral philosopher of the English tradition. But it depends how you're using that self-love and rationalizing it.
Yes.
Now, let's think of a few examples, perhaps, of real moral beauty. An occasion when one reads about it or is in the presence of it. For example, Sidney Carson, at the end of A Tale of Two Cities, decides to sacrifice himself. He says, it's a far, far better thing, etc., that I do than I've ever done before. Altruism. Altruism would be an example of moral beauty.
Yes, without question.
But they're not always. So the activity that's going on in Cortex, when I read about this and say, well, there's a fine person, is that the same kind of activity up there that I get if I'm seeing a really wonderful painting, shall I say?
Well, no, this is a very, very difficult question to answer, and there is no answer to it. The fact is that there is a center in the frontal cortex which is active when you experience pleasure, when you experience aesthetic emotions, or when you experience reward. Of course, beauty is not easily separable from pleasure and reward. But whether you're experiencing the identical same kind of thing is not a question that we can technically answer today. All we can do is say the same part of the brain that's active.
Is it the same part of the brain that's active when, let's say, the stereotypically smutty schoolboy is going through the pages of a top-shelf magazine, and is the same kind of recognition that's going on there as when I wander around an exhibition devoted to the drawings of the later Michelangelo?
Well, this is
because it's the search for pleasure in a sense.
Yes,
in both cases,
it is
highly activated.
It's a sense for pleasure, but you see, neurobiology at the present time, neuroaesthetics is a relatively young field, very young, it's 10, 15 years old, avoids people who are very educated or cultivated or who know too much. Because you see, for example, if you take a painting by Francis Bacon, now most people think that his portrayals are horrible. Margaret Thatcher is the one who said, that horrible man who paints those dreadful pictures, right?
Yes.
A painter, on the other hand, can see great painterly qualities in them.
Yeah.
And that's why the neuroaesthetics is interested in the common people, in people like myself, and children. But
I'm very interested in this universality, you see, of the response, because it does seem to me that beauty is one of the very, very few qualities, awareness of beauty, is one of the very few qualities that's really universal, a universal feature of the human condition.
Yes.
We all, it seems to me, have very decided ideas about what is beautiful and what is not beautiful.
Yes.
And perhaps refined members of an artistic avant-garde would look at Francis Bacon and find beauty there. And perhaps those who are not so attracted to that area of avant-garde would look at shall we say, some Victorian prints, those terrible prints one comes across sometimes of Victorian fellows rather beefy and drinking beer in ale houses, dressed in riding coats. Now, an awful lot of people would say, oh, I'd rather have that on my wall than that dreadful man Francis Bacon. But what is common to both these groups of people, they recognise beauty as it applies to them.
Yes. So the recognition and experience of beauty is, you might say, a universal characteristic and a universal right.
An universal right?
Yes.
Now, where does that take us?
Well, it takes us to the understanding that you have not any more rights because you are educated, you've read history or literature. You don't have any more rights to experiencing beauty than a person who's never been to school, who comes from a very, very sort of shanty town somewhere in the slum somewhere. They have got the same rights as you and I. And we have to understand and respect their experience of beauty, even though it may differ vastly. But having said that, I think we're going to find as well that their experience of facial beauty is not going to be vastly different from ours, because that's biological beauty. Their experience of the beauty of bodies is not going to be very different from ours, because that's also biological beauty. Now, if I may just digress.
I think you may digress, yes.
What I am shocked by is that I find a lot of the dresses that women wear and expose themselves in these dresses in, for example, at the Cannes Film Festival or at the Met or in Hollywood, are shockingly ugly. Now, there must be people in this world who find them very beautiful, which is why they spend so much money on them, or they're filmed. But and I find myself a bit. I think I must be an outsider here, because I don't find these at all beautiful. I find them. Give me a nice slim lady in a Chanel suit. That to me is very appealing. Now,
so you'd be a partisan of the little black dress a la Coco Chanel.
Yes, very much. Coco Chanel is Coco Chanel. She really understood women more than Yves Saint Laurent, more than Dior, more than anyone else, because what she understood really is that what's important in fashion is that a woman should feel good, regardless of how you see it, and that's why I sort of wonder to myself, maybe these ladies who show themselves in these dresses, which are quite appallingly ugly for me, maybe they feel good in them.
What of the question of the annual ball held in New York in aid of lots of animal balls in New York at the Metropolitan, raising money for the Metropolitan Opera House?
It's horrible.
And these are these morally squalid, therefore, these dresses, would you say?
Well,
and why, if that is so, why should that be so?
Well, they are no. Look, the first impact is that they are hideously ugly, and I think a lot of these women, mainly women, men are they also are increasingly coming in, but I'm speaking mainly of women. I can't see that they look at themselves in the mirror because they couldn't find it very beautiful, but they evidently do. I do find it morally squalid that anyone should spend 40, 50, 100,000 pounds on a dress, especially one which makes them look ugly, when there is much better ways of spending.
But from a utilitarian point of view, the money spent on that dress and the money raised for the Metropolitan Opera House furthers an art form that both you and I are really rather great fans of.
Well, yes, but I.
The means may be rather awful, but at the end justify the means.
Okay, well, so let me give you the example of a question that is asked when you're deciding what mechanisms are activated during the experience of moral beauty. There are questions like this: you are hungry, you've got a very succulent steak in front of you, and you can eat it yourself and satisfy your hunger, or you can give it to a hungry child who's been deprived of food for a long time,
yes,
which would be the morally better thing to do. What do you choose? It's on that basis.
And that would be a morally beautiful. That would be an example of moral beauty.
And that would lead to activity in the medial orbital frontal cortex. The first one, probably not. No, it does not.
Now, we skirted earlier on in our conversation the issue of architectural beauty.
Yes.
A subject that's become highly controversial
Yes.
in the past few decades. and the revival of neoclassicism, sometimes, it seems to me, in a rather arid way, following a rule book rather than the dictates of genuinely creative artistic endeavour. What kind of issues do you think arise aesthetically when one tries to account for a beautiful building?
Well, the first issue that arises is whether you find it beautiful or not. And it is very curious. I admire the work of Frank Gehry very much. But he has also been described as the worst architect in the world.
Yes.
So there are a lot of people who do not admire him.
They're certainly very big, aren't they?
They're very big, but you won't find the Vitruvian laws applied there. And Vitruvius had very interestingly, had very precise laws derived from a study of the human body.
Yes.
And the human body, of course, the Greeks thought that they could do it, construct a perfect human body of mathematical rules, and that's what Vitruvius applied. I really don't know. For example, people speak of symmetry in architecture as being important. Anyone who goes to a cathedral which is admired by everybody, the Chartres Cathedral, looking at it from the outside, is anything but symmetrical. Now, the windows of Chartres might be wonderful, etc., but Chartres is not, to my mind, the most wonderful cathedral in the world. So I don't know what it is, what rules apply.
I think the problem with an awful lot of the debate about architectural beauty is that it's really a debate about schools of thought, adherence of different schools of thought. So, I'm a classical architect, or I'm a modernist, or even I'm a brutalist. That's what really gets me going. And it seems to me that if you're just following the rules, and there are rules for all these kinds of works of art, it's highly unlikely that one is going to create an original account of beauty. There may be people who would be very happy just wandering around a neoclassical building all day round, like perhaps the late Adolf Hitler, a great adherent of neoclassicism. But it seems to me unlikely that the beauty is going to be of a kind that's really sustaining.
But let's take an example of sustaining beauty. Let's take one which is not sustainable in my view. So the piazza in front of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Bernini, is a wonderful example of a welcoming place. It welcomes the weary pilgrim, or the man just going there, or the woman just going there for inspiration. And it has always remained so. There's always something very welcoming about it, and I think the vast space is one of them. Now, transfer your thoughts to the Pompidou Center in Paris. Now, I find that a hideous building in every way. It doesn't even follow the rules of architecture, because one of the rules of architecture is that the material should be very good, but it implodes every 5 years.
It's like a punch in the face, I think, every time one comes across it.
Yes. And yet, there are people who think, people listening to this would say, Zeki is really a madman. It's a beautiful building, Pompidou. Nothing will convince me of it, by the way. I think it's a horrible building, and I think it's unfortunate that they destroyed the enjoyment I used to have of having onion soup at 4 a.m. in the Halles. It's gone because of that.
I think the Pompidou Centre is ghastly because it is, as it were, the great moi. It's the great I. Look how clever I am, the architect, because I'm able to turn things inside out. And that's a technical facility rather than an artistic one, it seems to me. Look at all these pipes.
Oh, they're ghastly. It's a ghastly thing. But, you see, there's another example which is worth mentioning, and I don't know how you feel about it. I don't feel very good about it, and that's the pyramid in front of the Louvre. Now, why do I not feel very well about it? The pyramid itself is actually a very lovely structure. But the way it was put, traduces the architect's intentions.
Yes.
The man who designed the Louvre never imagined this to be a...
You mean it's bad manners?
Well, no, it's not.
It's not coordinated.
It's not only bad manners. It jars. I've seen.
It's like trying to study marine biology and French literature at the same time. uncoordinated, not making much sense.
Well, this is having studied marine biology and the French and thing that does not work. I've been to it so many times from the outside, and I just cannot bring myself to feel that this was properly placed. The building, the pyramid itself is wonderful. Its position is not.
It's very cool and translucent. There's something almost mystical about that shape, I think.
Yes.
And really evocative of the original pyramids in Egypt.
Yes. Yes.
And I was totally unprepared for the impact of those pyramids on me when I went there early one morning.
To Egypt.
And to the pyramid. And I thought, I'm just going to be seeing a lump of old stones piled on top of each other. But to be there when the sun was beginning to rise was extraordinary aesthetic sensation.
Yes.
That I'll never forget.
In Egypt. But what do you think of the pyramid in Paris?
It doesn't induce me notions of mystical awe, communion with the transcendence. But I am, generally speaking, an admirer of I.M. I think he's one of the great contemporary architects. But I do think that other architects, and now we're talking now about the architecture of the millennial period, when there's a lot of money around, and lots of architects were allowed to impose their egos on the public consciousness.
Especially in London. Which they devastated, in fact, in my view.
We've ranged very widely. I'd like us to finish by discussing literary beauty and notions of form and expression. And I think that in the revival of a classical idea of beauty in the 1920s and 30s, I think especially with T.S. Eliot and others, there was a recovery of genuine aesthetic beauty and getting away from the romantic assertiveness, which is rather like the bad manners of some modern architects. Form, once again, very important here, but it seems to me, of course, it's what you do with a form that matters.
Yeah.
Just to say, sonnet has certain structure, and that is what makes it beautiful, but those qualities of form of themselves don't account for the beautiful impact that that arrangement of words can have on the human mind. These are again questions of style, I think, aren't they? And way you deal with the arrangement of words.
Literary beauty has not been studied in as much detail as other kinds of beauty because of technical reasons. The amount of time you can spend in a scanner is limited, so each stimulus should be maximally not more than 20 seconds, which is a very short period of time.
Yes. This is the scanner. When you go in and investigate.
It has not been studied in great detail, but certainly, I mean, it is a very striking thing. I 3 summers ago reread Shakespeare's Othello, and I'm amazed at how can anyone come up with language like this. It is so beautiful, so wonderfully constructed. Now, I am sure that if you were to put me in a scanner and read a few lines, remind me of a few lines from Othello, I'm sure the same center in the brain would light up. What is very interesting to me is the poetry of T.S. Eliot, because I often do not understand the four quartets, but I still find them very, very beautiful.
Yes.
And I don't really know what they mean when he says the way up is the way down, the way forward is the way back. It's ambiguous. I have my views as to why Eliot cultivated ambiguity, but that's another story. The fact is that it is very beautiful but incomprehensible.
Ash Wednesday especially.
Ash Wednesday is
notoriously difficult.
Yes. Well, I think it's partly because he was trying to... I think T.S. Eliot was a great artist, so he could not camouflage himself too much, except by making things so difficult that you had to go and spend hours and hours in the library to decipher every line.
So enjoyable to have had an opportunity to exchange these thoughts about the nature of beauty and high art
My
in
pleasure.
high summer.
My
Looking
pleasure.
forward to our next appearance.
Indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Semir. Thanks for listening. Do join us for the next of this series of podcasts. For more information about EF's research and publication programme, go to www.erasmusforum.co.uk.